Wait for it. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year! Welcome to 2018. I'm Mike, the Bowtie Writer. Happy Tuesday. I am really excited for what's coming on this coming year for this channel. Some more nuts and bolts videos, some more discussions of the craft, and some convention reports. So that's going to be really exciting. I'm looking forward to what we've got planned in the works. But before we dive into 2018, I did want to take one last look at 2017. And let's be clear, 2017 was not a nice year. It was a pretty rough year. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. But I do want to spend a little bit of time looking back at some of my favorite books from the year. So let's spend some time looking back over those favorite books. Let's get to it. Okay, let's not get to it actually just quite yet. There's two small caveats to know before we go a bit further. Number one is that the actual ordering of these books on this list is kind of arbitrary. These are just 10 books that I really enjoyed. These were 10 of my favorites. The difference between number 1 and number 7 is a very, very small difference. So I wouldn't write too much into it or obsess over what's number 3 versus number 5. Number 2, the second caveat is that I try to do this to help books get exposure. I want people to be exposed to books they not be aware of. So, for example, Brandon Sanderson's Oathbringer came out this year, and it's a very fascinating book, and I love Brandon Sanderson's work, but Brandon Sanderson does not need my help selling thousands and thousands of copies. So these are books that you might not have heard of. It doesn't mean that I don't like Brandon Sanderson or that John Green is terrible, nothing like that. It's just that I want to try and help provide some exposure to some books that you might not have heard of, as opposed to those heavyweights that are mainstays in the genre. Now, let's get to it. Number 10 on this list is Max Gladstone's Last First Snow. This is actually one of the novels of the craft sequence. The craft sequence begins with the book called 3 Parts Dead, and it is actually one of my favorite series currently. This is set in a world after there was a major god war. Some of the key players include, for example, international necromantic firms, people who turned their lives over to magic and now are living undead, just literally walking skeletons in robes. Also various renegade gods and factions trying to possess the different cults and get the power of the gods. One thing that's really neat about the craft sequence is that, as opposed to say the Wheel of Time, where each book clearly builds upon the other in one big sequence, instead, Max Gladstone has set out this world of the craft sequence, and then each book explores different characters and different time frames and entirely different geographies. I particularly loved Last First Snow because some of the characters that you saw earlier in the series were really kind of creepy and one-dimensional and scary, and here you get to see some surprising depth to them. And as always, his characters are riveting and fascinating, and the twists are incredible. So it's a fabulous, fabulous story. I really loved the craft sequence. Max Gladstone does wonderful work. You should definitely check it out. Number 9 on this list, James A. Corey's Avalons Gate. This is the third book in the Expanse series. It's also probably the closest thing there is to an exception on my rule about trying to not provide exposure to authors who already have a lot of exposure, because there is a wonderful television show based off the Expanse that's already out there. But the books were just that good. Avalons Gate is the third book in the series, and for me, this is the book where the Expanse really kicked into a much bigger gear, and I really liked the changes that you started seeing. In this book, you start getting a much bigger and bigger perspective about the universe of the Expanse, and that's when I started realizing that I am basically reading epic fantasy in space, and it is awesome. The best part is that you're also getting this big picture scope through the wonderful characters of James A. Holden and his crew, who are just fantastic characters to follow throughout their adventures. They provide wonderful narrators so that you can see this bigger and bigger world. And the setup to this book and the twists and turns throughout were incredible. So this was one of my favorite books of the year because of the twists and because of that incredible scope that started developing. I really enjoyed this one. Next up on the list is Denjegzo Wexler's The Forbidden Library. Denjegzo Wexler's name might be more familiar to you from some of his flintlock fantasy books like The Thousand Names. And those books are very good, but they tend to be like very big, heavy doorstopper tomes. This is the first of his books that was for juvenile audiences. The main protagonist is a young plucky happy-go-lucky girl who takes no nonsense from anybody. The magic system is where people who are readers can get sucked into certain magical books, and these books can contain spirits that they can call upon. There's a mystical library, there's talking cats, there's invisible spirits, there's traitorous fae, and all the while you've got a wonderful protagonist. I honestly didn't expect to like this book nearly as much as I did, but when I got into it, it turns out I love this book, and I found myself crying at some of the later passages because the twists and turns were just that poignant. While this might be a book intended for juvenile audiences, it does not pull any punches, so I really enjoyed The Forbidden Library. Now I can't wait to get my hands on the next books. It was that good. Don't let the fact that it's in the J section dissuade you. It's phenomenal. Up next is Mur Lafferty's Six Wakes. The book opens with people waking up in cloning bays. They're clones. They've been implanted in their memories, and they wake up in the cloning vats surrounded by blood as every single person on this crew of this generation ship has been killed, and somebody has screwed with their memories and woken them up, and they don't know which one of them did it. It becomes a whodunit in space with clones while you're trying to figure out the mysterious past of every single one of these people, and they're trying to rediscover what happened in the last 25 years. This book grabbed me from the beginning and did not let go throughout the entire end. The characters are really distinct and memorable throughout, and the twists are just crazy. I can't really talk to a lot more about it without spoiling anything, but this is one juicy mystery that you should definitely ride all the way through because it is fantastic and a lot of fun. Next up is Sarah Gailey's River of Teeth. Historically, the United States at one point almost started raising hippos in the Mississippi to resolve a meat shortage. Like this was actually introduced in Congress and it was voted on. However, someone finally told Congress people that, hippos are really dangerous and they kill lots of people, right? And so the measure was voted down. Sarah Gailey says, well, what if in fact that measure was passed, and so you have a Wild West story on hippos. The characters are very diverse and super fascinating. I really enjoy this diverse cast that you have and the wonderful adventures that they deal with as they try to set up a wonderful heist on the Louisiana plains. It's an amazing series. It's a lot of fun. It was one of my favorite books because Ruby Roo is amazing. Up next on this list is Kin Lu's Grace of Kings. This is the first book in the Dandelion Dynasty. Now the reason Kin Lu is on this list is because a lot of fantasy is sort of this vaguely pseudo Middle Ages European stuff. Kin Lu, however, is inspired by something completely different. He is inspired by various myths and Chinese history and important legends. It comes across with something that has a very different tone, but an incredible scope. These characters who start out being friends and then sort of go different ways, and they all grow in very complicated, complex ways along vastly different paths. There are actions that have consequences. There are gods who are involved for lots of their own agendas, along with some petty squabbling. There's also battle kites and submarines and oh my gosh, there is so much. His book is very fantastic. It's got all the trappings of epic fantasy, but it's got a very different flavor from anything I've seen before. So if you like epic fantasy, I highly recommend the Dandelion Dynasty. Up next, number 4 on this list is KB Wager's Behind the Throne, and we begin to meet our protagonist, Hale. She was a princess, then she ran away and became a gunrunner, and now she's been called back in to her service for her family, and she must again become a princess. Imagine, if you will, that Princess Leia was not Princess Leia, but in fact Princess Leia plus the rebel Han Solo and a smuggler with an attitude who's suddenly thrown back into politics trying to figure out why people are trying to assassinate her. Hale is no nonsense, she kicks ass, and it is a hysterical book that is super fun. On top of that, Behind the Throne sort of showed me some blinders that I didn't realize that I have. There is a matriarchy that's set up in this world, and it makes perfect sense in world, and it's constantly showing me assumptions that I didn't know that I had and forcing me to question them. It's a fantastic book, and the rest of the series is phenomenal as well. You get to watch Hale kick ass and take names, and she's a riot of a protagonist to root for. So these books are really fun. I really enjoyed these books this year. Number 3 on this list is Aled Boudoir's House of Binding Thorns. This is the second Dominion of the Fallen books. This is a post-magical war Paris, and there are fallen angels tentacles that are everywhere. We follow one of the Fallen who's in charge of House Hawthorne this book, Asmodeus, who is one of the most riveting characters that I have encountered in a while, who's also terrifying. You get to see these Fallen navigate through lots of court intrigue, lots of political struggles. Some of the reason that I love Alette's book is because while some fantasy is becoming sort of hyper-rational in what magic can do and not do, Alette instead plays on the opposite end of the spectrum, and so you get this ghostly magical system, so you're left with this wonderful bit of mystery about what people can do and what's going on, and it leads to some of the most haunting imagery that I have encountered all year. It is a fantastic book with just some succulent language. Number 2 on this list is Nicky Drayton's Prey of the Gods. Oh my god, this book was amazing and hysterical. I have not had so much fun reading a book in a really long time. This book is amazing. It has it all. First of all, it's got the beginnings of a robot revolution. Second of all, it's got age-old gods and their mythology and how that's trickled down to impact the world today. Number 3, it's set in South Africa, so it's got a very different vibe from a lot of the other westernized fantasy, and the characters are fantastic and wonderfully diverse. They are super cool. I started reading this book going, wow, that's an interesting opening line. I'll read just a little bit more. And then I was, 50 pages in going, that is really neat. And then 200 pages later, I'm like, oh my god, that's amazing. That is happening. And then finally I got to the end of the book and I was like, whoa. She is fantastic. I really recommend this book. Number 1 on this list of my favorite books of the year is actually, hands down, Angie Thomas's The Hate That You Give. Now, Angie Thomas's The Hate That You Give is a book that has experienced tremendous success. It was number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list forever, just about. It's been an incredible sensation. There is a movie deal in the works as well. There's a lot of exposure. So I know that my second caveat doesn't quite apply here because lots of people have heard about Angie Thomas's The Hate That You Give. However, some people have dismissed this book because it's YA, and they really shouldn't. Now, it is not sci-fi fantasy at all. The Hate That You Give follows the protagonist Star, and she unfortunately sees one of her friends get shot and killed by a police officer. And it's a complicated, harrowing, tragic situation. And the reason that I love Angie Thomas's book is that she lets complicated, messy, difficult things be complicated, difficult, and messy. There's no platitudes here. There's no fake, simple solutions. And there's no bandaging over complicated realities. She engages unflinchingly with all of that. And it is this brutal, honest look through this book that just blew me away. The Hate You Give is by far my favorite book of 2017. Definitely check it out. That's it. That's all I have for this week. Those are my favorite books from this last year. I know 2017 was a really hard year, but some really good books did come out of it. If there's any books that you think I missed, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what books you really enjoyed last year and what other books you think deserve some more notice. As always, if you liked what you saw, please feel free to like, share, or subscribe. That really does help me out, and I appreciate the support. And that's it. That's all I have for this week. I'm Mike, the Bowtie Writer. Be kind to yourselves. I will see you all next time.